Loading. It's loaded. There we are. Hooray, we have slides. That's excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Charlie, and today I'll be talking about Beyond Delete My Browser History, infosec after death. Oh, come on. Here we go. So who am I? So my name's Charlie, as I've just said. I'm on the red team at GitLab. I'm an ex-software engineer, and I turned security in the last year. And I'm glad to have done so, because I'm having a lot of fun. It's very interesting. So I'm not here in the capacity as a GitLab person. I'm just in my own capacity, so my views are my own. I love sharing knowledge, telling stories, and talking about things, sharing knowledge, things like that. I also play music, and I like to grow stuff and make things out of wood. I am also a person who has made a non-zero number of caskets that's currently in use. So today, let's talk about death and tech. So I'll be mentioning death and dying, as you probably got from the title. I will mention some people who have died, and some of the content may be upsetting, so I won't be offended at all if you decide to leave, so not to worry about that. This is extremely not legal advice. I am not a lawyer. Just don't listen to me. Just have a think. If I just get you to think about these things, that's all I want. So hopefully I'll inspire at least one person to think about some of these things. So gallows humor, AI-generated skeletons, lots of them, in various situations incoming. So yes, I'd like to spark some conversation and thinking in that, on this intersection between death and technology. So yes, on death, our memories remain. It's natural for us to want something more than our memories, something tangible, something the dead person valued, something they made, something that you want to hold on to, something more than just our memories. Let's talk about a people who leverage new technology to them that, in our eyes, is kind of a strange way. Of course, it's the Victorians, obligatory. Every talk has to mention them, right? So preventable diseases and appallingly bad working conditions meant that death was ever present in day-to-day life, even really rich people. So Queen Victoria lost her beloved Prince Albert to typhoid fever. And she had a highly visible grieving process that kicked off this cultural fascination with death and grief, and is sort of a public, even fashionable thing. Newspapers and telegraphs also facilitated the transmission of obituary details across long distances and wide audiences. So instead of just kin knowing, everybody knows. So it's interesting, right? So we had new grieving protocols for the surviving family, specifically women. I mean, if a woman's husband died, she had to wear black for 2 years in public. So it was very strict protocols. Park-like cemeteries were built to facilitate this public ritualistic display of grief. And photography was a very new thing at the time. So probably you've heard of Victorian death photography, in which the dead were propped up by surrounding family and their photos taken with their eyes open. This was often the only memory they had, physical reminder of their likeness, especially for young babies and children, of which there were many. So often, if they couldn't afford a lithograph, which was the likeness, the way to get a likeness previously, they would get a photograph instead. So yes, we find it a bit weird, but if that's your only option, then you do it. But let's be real, death photography would totally have been on Victorian Instagram had it existed. So I'd like to focus on 2 cultural trends: the increasingly public display of a private, intimate ritual, and leveraging technology to preserve their memory and for vast distribution of information. So contrast that to today. We have medical advances, hygiene practices, vaccines, labor laws, and for many of us, death is pretty distant in our day-to-day lives. We also have the explosion of publicly available content of the private lives of strangers. So although we don't have public grieving rituals mandated by society, we do have a public distribution mechanism for information and emotional expression that can instantaneously reach a vast audience. That is, social media. It allows connections with so many people, regardless of distance. Scales beyond what a single mind can comprehend. We're surrounded by automated systems, ingesting all the data we put in, and keeping it kind of long past its use-by dates in our mind and in our short-term memories. Data is, by design, persistent. The data representing people's lives and their experience doesn't have an end date, and yet our lives are finite. So data is forever, human lives not so much. The third paradox is that we have this intentional preservation we have in our own minds, and yet the data we have preserves these things as is by default. So think about if you have, I'm just going to use Facebook as an example. You might have had Facebook for a few years now, maybe decades. Maybe you have a friends list that has been collected over the decades. Maybe it's small and well curated, or maybe it's increasingly large because you don't really unfriend people because maybe it feels rude. Unintentionally keeping these connections active instead of letting them end. So there's no real protocol for breaking up with a friend and not even unfriending. It seems like we don't really do that very well as a society. So our short-term memories, we update these things constantly, letting things that are no longer in our day-to-day kind of fade away unless we actively maintain that memory. A database doesn't really get that. It doesn't understand that a friendship has faded away because you don't see each other anymore, or you've moved away, etc. So it doesn't get that unless we update the state. We have to actively update it to tell it something has ended. So as a result, we get some strange anomalies between real life and social media. You might get a pop-up of a memory of a primary school friend who passed away from cancer, or a person you friended a decade ago at a party, and then a mutual friend is mentioning their death from a car accident. Your brain has moved on, but the data still sees it connected to you and thus worth showing. So the grief context is a complicated thing. When someone close to you passes away, the grief really is a processing of a change of state to a new reality without that person. A phrase that I really like is, grief is love with nowhere to go. The closure can take a long time. It's a very personal process, and it's very delicate. The public nature of social media, massive scale, and data persistence results in kind of some odd cases. Sometimes you'll see, and again on Facebook, a memory bubbling up of a person and a happy memory you had. You know that person has died, but maybe Facebook doesn't. Maybe it's their birthday. Hey, wish this person a happy birthday. I'd like to. Social media accounts sometimes are still used. Maybe you had a couple and one of the people had their name on the social media account, and then the other person starts posting as them, and just because doesn't want to delete the account, doesn't have one of their own, so they just keep those connections going. I know that. That's certainly a thing that happens. Maybe a scammer has stolen their credentials and then has started posting and friending people, or maybe cloned their account. So takedowns are difficult enough when you're not going through grief. It's a nightmare if you are. So a funeral director friend that I have, everyone needs one of them, asked me about the intersection between tech and death. She says, what do I tell people who are going through this, or how to prepare for this? And what can I tell? She says, you know computers, what should I do? So it sent me down a rabbit hole of law, tech, etc. And I spoke to 4 different legal experts to understand the nature of laws and digital assets. In classic legal expert fashion, I got long answers that boiled down to it depends. So I'm going to try to give you some sound bites that are abstracted beyond all usefulness. However, it does give you a bit of a glimpse into a foundation of these things. But again, please don't listen to me. I'm not a lawyer, but I can sort of give you some sound bites. So it depends on where the user is, where the platform is based, and what sort of data it is. So I asked who owns your data? And it was, well, ownership is kind of a tricky thing because we use it for physical objects, of which there's only one, and data you can copy. So instead of possessing and controlling completely this physical object, you can kind of control what other people can do with it, even though they are holding it. So personal identifiable information, you can kind of control it depending on your jurisdiction and where the platform is based, etc. So when you give it to a service, it's kind of no longer truly yours, but you can sometimes control what can be done with it. For example, if you live in a jurisdiction where you have the right to be forgotten, or if you want to know what a service holds about you, you can ask that. You can always ask, even if it's not a legal thing, you can always ask nicely, and the platform or the service might be a good egg and go along with it. In Canada and New Zealand, I think in Canada and the United States, some states in the United States, because there's 50 of them, right to be forgotten and destroy upon request might be a thing, depending. And in New Zealand, we have some laws around this, common law privacy rights, the Privacy Act of 2020. And so being able to request the data an organization holds about you. Some data as well has special protections. So health data is quite heavily regulated. So what about work product? So it's not about you personally or your health, but it's something like a social media post or maybe some art you put up on some art sharing site. So it's called work product, and it's kind of includes the stuff that you contribute to a platform's content. Social media posts can be deleted, but are they gone? Probably not. They just might be hidden from you. Things like FOSS contributions to an open source repository on GitHub or GitLab, those probably, you can delete them, but someone has probably cloned it. And so, yes, you can delete it from your repository, but it won't be gone. So these things, digital goods are also a thing where you can buy them, like an ebook, for example, and yeah, they are licensed to you. So that's controlling of things. So legally, what happens to digital assets when a person dies? So when a person dies, they are no longer a natural person. So a lot of the legal rights around their PII go away, is what I understand. A dead person does not have rights, but information relating to them does not constitute personal data. So they're not subject to stuff like GDPR, for example, but their estate can act on their behalf. So depending on the applicable laws, et cetera, and laws around licenses and things. So once a person dies, the license kind of stops being a thing, so it's non-transferable generally. So if you bought an ebook, once you're dead, nobody owns the ebook, and therefore they can yank the license because it's licensed to you. Technically, what happens to digital assets when a person dies? Nothing. That's the problem. The Oxford Internet Institute has done a study saying that Facebook in 2070 will have mostly dead users. There'll be more dead people than alive people on that platform. By 2100, they estimate it will be 4.9 billion deceased users. It's a lot. In 2023, so last year, November, Google, they wanted to start deleting accounts that were inactive for 2 years. So they proposed doing that, and there was a lot of conversation about that, because some people want to keep the email address of somebody who's died. So how do you balance between those things? Because sometimes accounts are simply abandoned, sometimes they belong to a dead person. It's hard to know the difference. However, we can notify the platform to say this person has died. So unfortunately, both with abandoned accounts and dead accounts belonging to dead people, the accounts are not being monitored. So they might be susceptible to hackers. They might have been created or had settings put down when they were less secure, for example, before multi-factor authentication maybe was required. They might have weak passwords. We might be moving cryptographically towards stronger and stronger standards. They might have a weaker cryptographic standard. It's complicated. So if the platform supports marking a person as dead, it does help. Okay, so we want to tell a platform. How do we do that? So originally, Facebook had, I'm going back to this, I'm just using that one because that's the platform where we have the strongest mapping between a real person and their account. So originally, Facebook allowed people to delete their accounts when they died. They said, please, when I died, please delete my account. Then they introduced something in 2009 called memorialization. The access is somewhat limited, so a person can't log into a memorialized account, and their private messages aren't viewable from anywhere else other than the other person on the other end of the message. So you can also appoint a legacy contact. So as of 2015, you can appoint a person who can take over your account when you die. And so they can do some limited things. Okay, so Facebook isn't the only platform out there. So Google, you can access, you can request access, and you can request to delete. So that might be photographs or things like that on there. X or Twitter, you can request deletion. I don't think they offer any other things other than that. This might be a bit outdated, but that's okay. But TikTok, I have no idea. It looks like there's just a general contact form, and so I guess you're rolling the dice. So that's, I guess they haven't quite gotten that far yet. That's okay. So of course, people will abuse this. Okay. So in 2013, which I know was a while ago, but it's still funny, so I'm going to talk about it. What's the burden of proof to say this person has died? So in 2013, BuzzFeed did a stunt in which they locked the account of their co-editor, John Herman. They memorialized his account while he was still alive. So they filled out the fields like so. So you can see that they have his name, his email, and his URL for his Facebook account. They said, yes, we are next of kin. We're close family. And they, in order to have a proof of death, they did a Google search. They found somebody with a very similar name who was 74 years old, living in a completely different part of the country. And they just submitted that as proof. And Facebook accepted it and locked John out of his account. Within an hour of publishing this story, it was reversed. But it showed that there's this weird mapping between dead and not dead within our digital and also real life. So in real life, there was a story about a man named Lal Bihari. He was pronounced dead while still being very much alive. His uncle bribed a local official because he wanted his land. So he was marked dead. And when you're dead, you can't do very much. You can't get a driver's license or get your IDs or do a lot of things, bank accounts, etc. So he spent 19 years trying to become re-alived. It was a lot of work. So he did all kinds of shenanigans, like trying to get elected and that sort of thing. So this is according to this Reddit thread and this Wikipedia article, which of course are fine and outstanding sources. So he took 19 years for him to dissolve, and he also created an association of dead people that has 20,000 people in it for Uttar Pradesh alone. It's a lot of really alive dead people. So in real life, we really don't handle this very well either. So it's not an isolated incident. We also have supply chain guy one's mum. This was from this thread. And so when his father died, his says it's supply chain guy, so I'm going to assume it's his. Happened to my mum when my dad died. They put her name on the death certificate by accident. So it was just a clerical error. She couldn't get a credit card, open a bank account, and then she got thrown in prison for identity theft because she was marked dead. And so after all that, when she actually died, it turns out marking someone dead twice is also really, really difficult. So we don't handle this in real life very well either. So being serious, if someone is dead in real life, but there's something we need in their head, what do? This is actually super common. There's no fingerprint ID or face ID, for example. It's either a pattern or a pin between the data on this phone, which may be their only technology, and the data and the family. So there might be Bitcoin wallets. There might be email and everything on this phone, and they can't get into it because they don't know the PIN. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and again, very common, according to my funeral director friend. This is an extreme example of this. Quadriga CX's CEO, Gerald Cotton. There was a crypto exchange based in Canada that he started called Quadriga CX. They locked away $137 million, though there's some other numbers floating around. Frozen in the Arctic in a super, super secure vault. That was their big thing. Unfortunately, it was too secure, and when he died, he was the only person with the password. So I guess we'll have to wait for those cryptographic standards to weaken a little before we can get at it. So there's a documentary about it called Trust No One. It's very good. So the question is it illegal to hack a dead person? So if we have a locked phone You're the executor of the state, it's all above board. The phone is locked. Is it illegal to ask somebody to hack it? Can you ring up your local hacker and ask them for help? The answer is, well, I went to Reddit to figure out what the answer is. I wonder what Reddit says, because this is probably fine. So I found an no stupid question thread. There was a person who had died, and they had a Twitter account. And they had a bot on the Twitter account that was based somewhere that was tweeting their location every hour. I don't know why. This is Reddit, it was probably real. And it was upsetting the family because it was the location of their death. The poster had their password and wondered if they should delete the account. Only 2 of the family members weren't okay with it. What would you do? Well, Reddit had some reckons, mostly terrible. Yes. Great work there, Internet. Okay, so I asked some legal experts instead. So I asked my legal experts, and they gave me an actual helpful answer, depending on, of course, where you are. So I asked, is it okay? And my Canadian-based lawyer and my American-based lawyer both said, it's probably okay as long as you don't misrepresent yourself or the situation. And so in Canada and the US, and most other places, I think, as an executor of the will, you are a proxy for that dead person. So you can do generally what they could do in their life. So as long as you don't misrepresent, it's probably okay. So if you forget the code to your phone, you can ask a hacker to unlock it. I mean, I don't know if you want to do that, but you can. Or you can just wait for another day, it's fine. But what about New Zealand law? Because that's where we are. Please mind the confused flag. And I don't know where the bow tie came from. Okay. So the answer is only with the deceased's permission, which is kind of hard to get in retrospect. Okay. So a locked phone can only be accessed with the deceased's permission. Yeah. But on the other hand, the person who's most likely to mine is kind of unavailable. So many of the legal experts that I said, they weighed the legality versus the practicality, and they said, well, the data's there. No one minds. Obligatory, do not do grinds. Okay. So speaking seriously again, here's some things to think about. In this community, we value privacy. We have some complicated online life. We like to obfuscate our identity and maybe anonymize ourselves online. So maybe we have a sort of web of different identities online. So think about it this way. If something happened to you, would your whānau be able to put your life back together? Would they be able to detangle all your accounts? How would they do that, especially if they were non-technical? This is on top of the usual post-death considerations, such as funeral and closing bank accounts and stopping rent payments and things like that. So here's some suggestions around that. You make a death plan with a legal will. Okay, so you have your will, you have your death plan with how you'd like to die, and things like do not resuscitate falls into that category. There's support on how to do this. You can also fill out the BDM28 notification of death registration for yourself now. You can do that. There's a lot of things like, where you were born and your mother's maiden name. These things don't change, they're constant. You just write them in. And then you file away. And so you have that ready so that when something does happen to you, it's ready for your next of kin and they don't have to do it themselves. Because you'd be surprised how many people don't know things like, what was the maiden name again? Or where were they born? Where exactly were they born? Because you know these things, presumably, but they might not. So filling this out is a great start. So it's BDM2A, go for it. Just do it. Access things. Do your next of kin know which accounts do you have? Can they enumerate them? Do they know which communities you're in, like gaming communities? Would they be able to unlock your phone if needed? Would they be able to access your emails? Because if you can access your email, often an email is, of course, the gateway, as we know, often the gateway to things like resetting other passwords. But if you can't do that, because the phone's locked, it's kind of a problem. So can you make those things conditionally available, perhaps? Multi-factor authentication, YubiKeys, backup codes, things like that. Make copies in different locations. I have one in a fireproof safe somewhere that's not in my house. I have multiple copies, but they're all in very safe places. Write down your phone access code maybe in a secure place, or appoint a legacy contact. I think Apple can do that, 1Password and LastPass and things like that. And password manager is also very good because they also enumerate what accounts you have already. So that's very handy as well. Platform things. So you can actually put your wishes on each platform so that when it does happen, your next of kin can also reach out to them and the wishes are already there. So they don't have to guess. So set things like legacy contacts, so someone takes over the account when you die. If a platform doesn't have that, you can use something like a README. So on GitHub and GitLab, you can put in a README and just say, if this thing happens, please pass all my things to this other maintainer of this project, or do this other thing, give it to this account. You can do that. So they take into a consideration at least. And it's something where you wrote it, and so they can see that. So in summary, please, the more stuff you do in advance, the easier it is for everyone. The classical will for physical stuff kind of isn't enough, but most people don't even have that. So if you haven't done it else, a physical will do that. Write it down and date it. A dated document is better than nothing, right? Even if it's outdated, it doesn't matter. It's something. It's better than guessing. Enumerate your accounts, allow someone to trust it to get access, and include the online communities you're in, like gaming. They might be able to help. A password manager is good for enumerating credentials. They offer legacy contacts as well. That's it. So, but also just keep in mind that every account you open, it's more complicated for the person who then has to wind it all down and detangle it. So just keep that in mind. So maybe just like get off the internet, like do something else, go outside, read a book or something. Yeah, so much of the internet was wrong about this stuff. And so talk to lawyers and experts in your particular country about your particular situation if you want details. I do have some resources, but I don't think I have time to go through them. But there's a blog by a workmate of mine who went through this with his wife. He's an infosec expert. He still struggled to put it back together. So this is a very good blog. EOLDR is a checklist, especially if you have a home lab, of what to tell a non-technical next of kin about what to do with your stuff, including how to dispose of hard drives or sell things. Community groups like coffin clubs and death cafes. Coffin clubs are essentially retired woodworkers who help make coffin clubs. New Zealand has a lovely tradition of coffin clubs. Death cafes, just have tea and cake, talk about death for a while. It's not morose, I promise, it's very nice. Trust No One is the documentary about Quadriga CX's CEO, and it's very good. And this book, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, was hilarious. It's about a young woman who starts working in a crematorium. I was laughing so hard that people next to me on the plane, I think they worried for my sanity. It was hilarious. Here's some more resources. I will release this talk as well, and the slides and that on the internet. Thank you so much. Come talk to me afterwards. I'm always happy to talk about whatever. So please come and talk to me afterwards.
Busted.